Chapter 55. How auspicas are verified by the light of natural instinct, and of some rules of finding of it out. Auspicia, and auguria, which foretell things to come by animals, and birds, Orpheus the divine himself, as we read, did teach and show first of all, which afterwards were had in great esteem with all that nations. Now they are verified by the light of natural instinct, as if from this, some lights of divination may descend upon four-footed beasts, winged, and other animals, by which they are able to presage to us of the events of things, which Virgil seems to be sensible of, when he sings, nor think I heaven on them such knowledge states, nor that their prudence is above the fates. Now this instinct of nature, as saith William of Paris, is more sublime than all humane apprehension, and very near, and most like to prophecy. By this instinct there is a certain wonderful light of divination in some animals naturally, as it manifestly appears in some dogs, who know by this instinct thieves, and men, and find them out, and apprehend them, falling upon them with a full mouth. By the like instinct vultures, foresee future slaughters in battles, and gather together into places where they shall be, as if they foresaw the flesh of dead carcasses. By the same instinct partridges, know their dam, which they never saw, and leave the partridge which stole away her dam's eggs, and sate upon them. By the same instinct also certain hurtful and terrible things are perceived, the soul of the men being altogether ignorant of them, whence terror and horror ceaseth much upon men when they think nothing of these things. So a thief lying hid in any house, although nobody knows, or thinks of his being there, strikes fear, and terror, and a troublesomeness of mind into the inhabitants of that house, although happily not of all, because the brightness of this instinct is not in all men, yet of some of them. So a harlot being hid in some very large house, is sometimes perceived to be there by some one that is altogether ignorant of her being there. It is mentioned in histories that Heracles, a certain Egyptian, a man of a divine nature, could discern unclean women, not only by his eyes, but by their voice, being heard afar off, and thereupon did fall into a most grievous headache. William of Paris also makes mention of a certain woman in his time, that by the same instinct perceived a man whom she loved, coming 2 miles off. Also he relates that in his time was a certain stork convicted of unchastity by the smell of the male, who being judged guilty by a multitude of storks whom the male gathered together, discovering to them the fault of his mate, was, her feathers being pulled off, torn in pieces by them. He also makes mention of a certain horse, who not knowing his dam, mother, and leaping of, copulating with, her, when afterwards he understood what he had done, bit off his own testicles, by way of revenge upon himself for his incest. The same doth Varro, Aristotle, and Pliny relate concerning horses. And Pliny makes mention of a certain serpent, called the asp, that did such a like thing, for she coming to a certain man's table in Egypt, was the daily fed, and she having brought forth some young, by one of which a son of her hosts was killed, after she knew of it, killed that young one, and would never return to that house any more. Now by these examples you see, how the lights of presage may descend upon some animals, as signs, or marks of things, and are set in their gesture, motion, voice, flying, going, meat, color, and such like. For according to the doctrine of the Platonists, there is a certain power put into inferior things, by which for the most part they agree with the superiors, whence also the tacit consents of animals seem to agree with divine bodies, and their bodies and affections to be affected with their powers, by the name of which they are ascribed to the deities. We must consider therefore what animals are saturnal, what are jovial, and what martial, and so of the rest, and according to their properties to draw forth their presages. So those birds which resemble Saturn, and Mars, are all of them called terrible, and deadly, as the screech, owl, the hawlet, and others which we have mentioned before, also the horn owl, because she is a saturnal solitary bird, also nightly, and is reputed to be most unfortunately ominous, of which the poet saith, the ugly owl, which no bird well resents, foretells, misfortunes, and most sad events. But the swan is a delicious bird, venereal, and dedicated to Phoebus, and is said to be most happy in her presages, especially in the auspicious of mariners, because she is never drowned in water. Whence Ovid sings, most happy is the cheerful, singing swan in her presages. There are also some birds that presage with their mouth, and singing, as the crow, door, whence Virgil, this did foreshow oft from the hollow home that ominous grow. Now the birds that portend future things by their flying are, viz. Buzzards, the bone breakers, eagles, vultures, cranes, swans, and the like, for they are to be considered in their flying, whether they fly slowly, or swiftly, whether to the right hand, or to the left, how many fly together. Upon this account if cranes fly apace, they signify tempest, when slowly, fair weather. Also when two eagles fly together, they are said to portend evil, because that is a number of confusion. In like manner thou shalt inquire into the reason of the rest, as this is showed of number. Moreover it belongs to an artist to observe a similitude in these conjectures, as in Virgil, Venus dissembling, teacheth her son Aeneas in these verses. All this is not for naught, else we in vain my parents' augury taught. Lo! Twice 6 swans in a glad company Jove's bird pursued through the ethereal sky, in heaven's broad tracks, now earth in a long train they seem to take, or taken to disdain, as they return with sounding wings, they sport, and heaven surrounding in a long consort. Just so, I say, thy friends and fleet have gained the port, or with full sails the bay obtained. Most wonderful is that kind of auguring of theirs, who hear, and understand the speeches of animals, in which as amongst the ancients, Melampus, and Tiresias, and Thales, and Apollonius the Tyanean, Apollonius of Tyana, who as we read, excelled, and whom they report had excellent skill in the language of birds, of whom Philostratus, and Porphyry, speak, saying, that of old when Apollonius sate in company amongst his friends, seeing sparrows sitting upon a tree, and one sparrow coming from elsewhere unto them, making a great chattering and noise, and then flying away, all the rest following him, he said to his companions, that sparrow told the rest that Aeneas being burdened with wheat fell down in a hole near the city, and that the wheat was scattered upon the ground. Many being much moved with these words, went to see, and so it was, as Apollonius said, at which they much wondered. Also Porphyry, the Platonist in his 3rd book of Sacrifices, saith, that there was a swallow, for it was certain, because every voice of any animal is significative of some passion of its soul, as joy, sadness, or anger, or the like, which voices it is not so wonderful a thing should be understood by men conversant about them. But Democritus himself declared this art, as saith Pliny, by naming the birds, of whose blood mixed together was produced a serpent, of which whosoever did eat, should understand the voices of birds. And Hermes saith, if any one shall go forth to catch birds on a certain day of the calends of November, and shall boil the first bird which he catcheth, with the heart of a fox, that all that shall eat of this bird, shall understand the voices of birds, and all other animals. Also the Arabians say, that they can understand the meaning of brutes, who shall eat the heart, and liver of dragons. Proclus also the Platonist believed, and wrote, that the heart of a mole conduceth to presages. There were also divinations, and auspicias which were taken from the inwards of sacrifices, the inventor whereof was Tages, of whom Lucan sang, and if the inwards have no credit gained, and if this art by Tages was but feigned. The Roman religion thought that the liver was the head of the inwards. Hence the soothsayers, inquiring after future things in the inwards, did first look into the liver, in which were 2 heads, whereof the one was called the head for the city, the other for the enemy, and the heads of this, or another part being compared together, they pronounced victory, as we read in Lucan, that the inwards did signify the slaughter of Pompey's men, and the victory of Caesar's. According to these verses, inwards all defects are ominous on part, and branch of entrails, doth increase, another part is weak, and flagging lies, beats, and moves with quick pulse the arteries. Then the bowels being finished, they search the heart. Now if there were a sacrifice found without an heart, or a head was wanting in the liver, these were deadly presages, and were called peculiaria. Also if a sacrifice fled from the altar, or being smitten, made a lowing, or fell upon any part of his body, then he ought to do, it was the lycomenus. We read that when Julius Caesar on a day went forth to procession with his purple robe, and sitting in a golden chair, and sacrificing, there was twice a heart wanting, and when C. Marius Utica was sacrificing, there was wanting a liver. Also when Caius the prince, and Marcellus, C. Claudius, and Petilius Cos, were offering sacrifices, that the liver was consumed away suddenly, and not long after, one of them died of a disease, another was slain by men of Liguria, the entrails, foretelling so much, which was thought to be done by the power of the gods, or help of the devil, hence it was accounted a thing of great concernment amongst the ancients as oft as anything unusual was found in the inwards, as when Sylla was sacrificing at Laurentum, the figure of a crown appeared in the head of the liver, which Posthumius the soothsayer interpreted to portend a victory with a kingdom, and therefore advised that Sylla should eat those entrails, himself. The color also of the inwards is to be considered. Of these Lucan made mention. Struck at the color prophets were with fear, for with foul spots pale entrails, tinged were. Both black, and blue, with specks of sprinkled blood they were. There was in times past such a venerable esteem of these arts, that the most potent, and wise men sought after them, yea the senate, and kings did nothing without the counsel of the augurs. But all these in these days, partly by the negligence of men, and partly by the authority of the fathers, are abolished.